For 50 years, nobody asked the question directly. Not journalists, not documentarians, not even the people closest to Arnold Schwarzenegger during one of the most documented rivalries in Hollywood history. The assumption was simple and went largely unexamined, that Sylvester Stallone was an actor who got in shape, not a bodybuilder who happened to act. At 78, Arnold addressed the question in a way few expected. What he said was more complicated than the premise suggested. This is the story of two men who spent 2 decades competing against each other, who built their bodies with unusual discipline, and who, by most accounts, ended up with a genuine mutual respect. Embedded in that story is a question that received little serious attention until recently. What would have happened if Sylvester Stallone had pursued competitive bodybuilding rather than acting? Could the man who played Rocky in Rambo have competed on the Mr. Olympia stage? And what does Arnold, a 7-time winner of that title, actually think? The question took 50 years to surface in part because it cuts to something both men cared about deeply. The body. Who had the better one? Who worked harder for it? Who was more serious about it? For Arnold Schwarzenegger, the body was the foundation of everything. Before the Terminator, before the California governorship, before his career as one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood, he was a teenager in Austria who saw a film about Hercules and committed himself entirely to building that kind of physique. He won the Mr. Olympia title 7 times. For Stallone, the body was a functional instrument, trained specifically for the role at hand. Rocky required a boxer's build. Fast, explosive, heavy through the shoulders and forearms. Rambo required something leaner, a physique that could plausibly belong to a man who had survived extended combat. He trained for both with serious coaches, including Franco Columbu, who had been Arnold's own training partner. The results were visible, but Stallone never competed. He never stood on a stage under judging lights. When Arnold was asked about this directly, his answer was not what might be expected from a man who spent 2 decades in open rivalry with Stallone, who had by various accounts spent years working to undermine him. What he said was more considered than that. To understand it properly, it helps to understand how the rivalry began. January 28, 1977. The Beverly Hilton Hotel. The Golden Globe Awards. Sylvester Stallone walked into that room as one of the most sought-after names in Hollywood. Rocky had just been released, and the reception was unlike anything the industry had seen in years. A story about a scrappy fighter from the streets, written and starred in by the same man, that had become one of the most beloved films in American history. Stallone was nominated in 6 categories that night. He was by any measure at the height of his career. Seated at the same table was a 29-year-old Austrian bodybuilder named Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger had just received the New Star of the Year award for his role in Stay Hungry, a film that has largely faded from public memory, but one that marked his first serious foothold in Hollywood. He was physically imposing, confident, and about to become Stallone's most enduring professional adversary. As the evening progressed, Rocky began losing. One nomination after another slipped away while Schwarzenegger sat nearby with his award. Stallone later said Schwarzenegger was visibly enjoying the losses. Then Rocky won Best Motion Picture Drama. The crowd responded. Stallone rose from his seat and before walking to the stage, he picked up a large floral centerpiece from the table and threw it towards Schwarzenegger. I grabbed this giant bowl of flowers and heaved it in his direction. It had lilies and tulips, Stallone later told Variety. It began a 10-year battle royale, and I thought the gauntlet is down. Schwarzenegger avoided the bowl. What followed was roughly 2 decades of sustained, often calculated professional competition, involving body doubles, fabricated film scripts, a billion-dollar restaurant chain, and eventually a genuine friendship. But in those early years, the animosity was unambiguous. Stallone described their relationship during that period with a line that has since been widely quoted. "We couldn't stand being in the same galaxy. Even our DNA hated each other." What made the rivalry so persistent and so personal was that it was not simply a competition over box office returns. It was, in large part, a competition over physicality. Both men understood that. Schwarzenegger's physique had few precedents in public life. He stood 6'2" and competed at around 235 pounds at his peak, with a chest, arms measuring 22 inches at their largest, and legs that, despite being considered his weakest body part by competitive standards, surpassed the development of nearly any other man in the sport. He won 7 Mr. Olympia titles, competing against the top bodybuilders of his era, men who had devoted their lives to the same pursuit. What distinguished Schwarzenegger was not size alone, but proportion. The breadth of his shoulders tapering to a comparatively narrow waist, the configuration bodybuilders refer to as the X-frame, produced a visual effect that went beyond mass. His physique from the 1974 Mr. Olympia is still cited, 5 decades later, as a benchmark for what competitive bodybuilding can produce. Stallone's physique was built for the screen rather than the stage, where Arnold Schwarzenegger was developed for maximum visual impact under competition lighting, for symmetry and proportion that judges could evaluate. Stallone was leaner, more functional, projecting speed and physicality rather than mass. For Rambo First Blood Part 2 in 1985, He reached an estimated 2.8% body fat, a figure that sits at the outer edge of what is physiologically sustainable. The abdominal definition visible in that film became one of the most referenced images in fitness culture for the following decades. He worked with Franco Columbu, Schwarzenegger's close friend, and a two-time Mr. Olympia, to develop specific muscle shapes suited to camera work. Columbu was direct about the objective. For Rocky, he wanted a lot of stuff in the shoulders and forearms so that when the camera came in, the muscles really looked big. The goal was not competitive bodybuilding. It was engineering a physique for a specific visual purpose. The question, one Schwarzenegger eventually addressed directly at 78, was whether that level of physical dedication could have translated to competitive bodybuilding. Whether Stallone, with different training, a different diet, and time committed to the sport from the beginning, could have competed at the professional level. Opinion has been divided on this for decades. One position holds that the gap is substantial. Schwarzenegger competed against Sergio Oliva, Lou Ferrigno, and Frank Zane, athletes whose development places them among the most advanced bodybuilders ever photographed. Stallone's build, however impressive in a film context, would not have placed competitively at a serious regional contest, let alone the Mr. Olympia. The other position argues that Stallone's conditioning, discipline, and genetics, he clearly carried an unusual capacity for muscular development, would have made him a genuine contender had he committed to the sport from the outset rather than to boxing and acting. When Schwarzenegger addressed the question, his answer was precise. He acknowledged Stallone's conditioning without qualification. Stallone at his peak, he said, represented the kind of physical development that most men who spend entire careers in the gym will not reach. The discipline was real, so was the sacrifice. The distinction he drew, however, concerned the basis of competitive bodybuilding itself. Discipline, he argued, is the entry requirement. What separates winners from the rest on a competitive stage is genetics. The shape of muscle bellies, whether a bicep has a high peak or a low flat insertion. Clavicle width relative to hip width. How a body distributes muscle across different groups. Whether the calves respond to training or resist growth regardless of volume. These characteristics are not products of effort, they are inherited. Schwarzenegger addressed this point directly in a 2023 interview with Howard Stern, when Stern asked why he had achieved more in bodybuilding than contemporaries who trained with comparable intensity. Schwarzenegger did not cite work ethic. He said a lot of it is genetics. From the athlete widely regarded as the greatest competitive bodybuilder of all time, that attribution carries weight. He trained as hard as anyone in the sport. He also possessed genetics that were by his own account exceptional. Both factors were present, and both appear to have been necessary. Applied to Stallone, the question then becomes one of genetic suitability for the competitive standard of the era. His development was evident, and his capacity for muscular growth was clearly above average. But his frame was not configured for the proportions that dominated bodybuilding. Judging in the 1970s and 80s, he lacked the extreme shoulder-to-waist differential that defined the silhouettes of the top competitors of that period. His muscle bellies, while well developed, did not produce the visual contrast that competition bodybuilding rewards at the highest level. His physique was optimized for a different purpose, and it achieved that purpose at an extraordinary level. Whether it would have translated to the Olympia stage is a question the structure of his body, not his commitment, ultimately answers. Could he have placed in a regional competition? Almost certainly. Could he have been competitive at the national level with dedicated training from his teenage years? Possibly. Could he have stood on the Mr. Olympia stage and been anything other than a marginal presence? In Arnold's assessment, and Arnold understands this world better than perhaps any person alive, probably not. He had the body for what he was doing was essentially Arnold's verdict. He was extraordinary at what he built his body for. But bodybuilding is a separate discipline, and while Stallone was fluent in fitness, he wasn't built to compete in bodybuilding at the championship level. Stallone has been notably candid about where he stood relative to Arnold in this specific domain. In the Netflix documentary Arnold, Stallone appeared and said something unexpected from a man whose ego was once large enough that he threw a bowl of flowers across a table at the Golden Globes. He was superior. He just had all the answers. He had the body. He had the strength. That was his character. That statement from Stallone about Arnold on camera stands as one of the more striking moments in the entire arc of their relationship. The man who once declared they couldn't stand to be in the same galaxy was sitting in front of a camera, voluntarily acknowledging that his lifelong rival was in this particular arena simply better. What does that do to the question of whether Stallone could have been a bodybuilder? It answers it. Not entirely, not in a way that forecloses all debate, because there is always room for argument when discussing what a person might have achieved in a different life. But it answers it in the most direct way available. The man who competed against the best bodybuilders in the world, who trained alongside Stallone's own coaches, who understood what elite bodybuilding required at a technical level, looked at Stallone's physique and said, extraordinary but not built for this. That is not a dismissal, it may be the most honest and respectful thing Arnold ever said about his greatest rival. The reconciliation was not planned. It came about through an unlikely vehicle, a themed restaurant chain. In the early 1990s, both men were still openly competitive. Arnold had just orchestrated the "stop, or my mom will shoot" maneuver, and the press remained full of their mutual friction when both made the same business decision. They both invested in Planet Hollywood, the celebrity-themed restaurant intended to challenge Hard Rock Cafe and expand their respective fortunes. The consequence of that shared investment was that promoting Planet Hollywood required Arnold and Stallone to travel the world together for the openings. Every new city, every new restaurant, every press event, they appeared side by side, placed in the same space with no way to avoid each other. Something shifted. Arnold described it later. "We started flying around the world together to promote it, and we became fantastic friends." That is an understated way to describe the end of 2 decades of genuine animosity, but it reflects something straightforward about human behavior. Sustained proximity erodes the distance that pride and competition maintain. Enough time spent sitting next to someone on long flights, eating in the same cities, sharing the ordinary absurdities of life on the road, and the idea that you despise them becomes difficult to sustain. By the late 1990s, they were friends. Not polite acquaintances, not a managed truce, but genuine friends. Stallone supported Arnold's campaign when he ran for governor of California. They appeared at each other's events. In 2010, they finally shared the screen in The Expendables, a moment that audiences had waited 3 decades to see. Schwarzenegger's cameo lasted only a few minutes, but the image of both men in the same frame was sufficient. 3 years later, they starred together properly in Escape Plan, playing rival prisoners working together to break out, a film that served among other things as a direct reference to the kind of action movies they had spent the 1980s competing to make. Stallone later invited Arnold onto his reality show The Family Stallone, and in that episode Arnold offered an observation that captured the full arc of their relationship with unusual precision. "Even though we were very adversarial when we were younger because we were competitive, it became something we realized we're incredibly alike. Cut from the same cloth and now I love the guy." Cut from the same cloth. That phrase is worth noting. It identifies the thing neither of them could acknowledge during their years of rivalry, that the intensity of their mutual antagonism was a direct product of how similar they were. Same hunger, same obsession, same refusal to accept second place, same willingness to do whatever was required to be the best. The rivalry was not a clash of opposites. It was a collision between two people who operated from the same fundamental drives. At 78, Arnold Schwarzenegger is in a different phase of his life. He has spoken openly about his heart surgeries. He has had multiple procedures, including one in 2020, and equally openly about the significant physical changes from his competitive peak. In interviews, he discusses aging with the same candor he has applied to most things. He does not minimize what is happening, and he does not claim to have made peace with it beyond what is actually true. In his Netflix documentary, he noted that he was never fully satisfied with his body even during his competing years, that he would look in the mirror and tell himself, "I don't know how this body could ever win this competition." That kind of honesty, acknowledging that even the most accomplished bodybuilder of his era dealt with body image concerns and the same insecurities that affect ordinary people in ordinary gyms, is part of what gives him credibility at 78. He is not managing his legacy, he is speaking directly. When he discusses Stallone now, the regard is evident. The two appeared together in April 2024 in the TMZ special Rivals, Friends, Icons, and watching them interact, finishing each other's sentences, laughing about things that would have been sources of genuine conflict 40 years earlier, is a notable moment in the long history of their relationship. Stallone, in that same special, described the moment Arnold arrived in Hollywood and what it meant to him. "Finally something to motivate me. Because he is, dare I say it, competition, a threat, whatever word you want to use." Unguarded and direct, Stallone was unsettled by Arnold. Not by the man personally, but by what Arnold represented. The possibility that there was not room for both of them, that someone would come out behind and that it might be him. What they each ultimately built rendered that fear obsolete. Arnold dominated bodybuilding in a manner that is unlikely to be equaled. Stallone created characters, Rocky Balboa, John Rambo, that are embedded in global culture in ways that extend well beyond film. These are cultural archetypes, the underdog, the survivor, images of human endurance that people who have never seen the films recognize on an instinctive level, on the willingness to endure discomfort in pursuit of a specific physical result, on a level of obsession with physical transformation that, at a certain point, stops being vanity and becomes something closer to craft. When Arnold, at 78, gives his honest assessment of whether Stallone could have been a bodybuilder, what he is doing is in effect paying tribute. He is saying, this man understood what it costs to build a body like this. He paid that cost, even if he paid it toward a different goal. He was extraordinary, even if the Olympia stage was not his destination. He was, in his own domain, equally obsessed, equally committed, and equally willing to put in what was required. From Arnold Schwarzenegger, that is not a qualification, it is a genuine compliment. The rivalry gave both men more than it cost them. The competition sharpened them. It pushed them toward levels they might not have reached independently. And the friendship that followed, unforeseen, improbable, more durable than most professional partnerships and most things in Hollywood that are built to last, turned out to be one of the more substantial things either of them produced. Two men, two careers built on the body. 50 years, and an answer that required all of that time to arrive. What it suggests beneath the Hollywood mythology and the box office figures is something more straightforward. The most intense rivalries are often sustained by a kind of mutual recognition. The person you are most driven to surpass is frequently the person who understands you most completely. When the competition ends and the distance closes, what remains is sometimes the last thing either party expected. In this case, something that resembles, in nearly every meaningful sense, brotherhood.